What we're going to do today is we are going to look at some fantastic stage illusions by one of the smartest men in magic and a friend of yours, Aaron, Mr. Teller. Now, I say he's a friend of yours. You've known him for a long time,
Just
right?
Teller.
Just Teller, yeah.
Just Teller. You know, I took a road trip with him many years ago. Of course, I was freaked out and excited. I introduced my mutual friend, had a lovely multi-hours and hours we talked. I went to his place, got to see his show so many times. And really, you know, the guy's a hero of mine. He's one of the best magicians in the universe, one of the most admirable magicians in the universe. His act is one of the best acts of all time. You know, Penn and Teller are just the hardest working magicians you'll ever see. And there's no doubt about it, the smartest. I mean, I don't know about you guys on the panel, but Penn and Teller, long before David Blaine, Penn and Teller changed my life forever.
You know what they really did is they separated themselves from the rest of magic at that point when they came around. They were magic, but the other thing. You know, they really made it unique. You know, they no one could do their act, right? No one could be them. You can't even come close to it.
Magicians have always, in those days, the big thing was to pick on Penn and Teller because they would supposedly give away the trick, right?
Right.
And of course, they never did. They just played it so well. You know, when a magician says, when Lance Burton says, "I'm going to teach you guys how to do a trick," you know, and then he does the egg trick, and then he does the sucker egg trick. You know, there's never really a sense that Lance Burton is actually going to teach you how to do a trick.
Right.
Right. But Penn and Teller played into it to where when they said they were going to tell you how these guys do it, they would seem to really be getting great joy out of blowing the stupid tricks that magicians use to fool people. And of course, it was just a setup. It was just a big setup and a hook for how they were going to blow your mind. But basically, it was always like the sucker egg trick, right? With different dressing.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
And so today, right, we have video that's just Teller. Now, I don't like to, of course, you can't separate Penn from Teller. That's like separating, you know, bacon from grease. Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I was going to say bacon from eggs, but
when you can, I think Teller's the grease. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. All right. Shall we get started?
Did there?
Or the bacon, depending on which you prefer. But I'm not here talking about lean bacon. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
all right.
So let's torture that metaphor a little more.
Yeah. I can't wait for you guys. I can't wait for you guys to see the needle trick, because it's like, in terms of we're looking at some of the stuff from their actual stage show, if you guys have ever seen them in Vegas. But this, man, this thing is incredibly good.
Let's react. Now, we don't have any tape today of Teller doing John Thompson's Great Thompsoniac, do we?
Maybe I'll let you know.
All righty, let's fire it up. Let's get something.
Yeah. All right, let me know if you can see it.
Yep.
All right, here we go.
This looks like
apple. Stuck into this apple are 100 size number 6 embroidery needles. Teller walks among you to find someone to watch this from on stage. You'll need someone watching him rather closely. In the meantime, would you stand up here for a moment? Just.
By the way, this is one of those tricks that always makes me nervous as a magician. Even if you have the most foolproof method, it still makes me nervous. You know, just a little nervous.
See you right there, yeah. And just take any one of those needles out of there and face the audience. And just face the audience and don't hurt yourself, but prove it's a real needle. I mean, well, that's okay. Just prove that they're both real then. Yeah, just maybe you could just tap the end of it so you could just see. I mean, don't inject yourself. Yeah, you don't know that could have some of those Martha Stewart muffin toxins on there. Just put them right back in there anyway. Thanks. You sit down. And Teller calls this the East Indian Needle Mystery. And this is the first trick that I ever saw Teller do. And it is the last trick you will see before the break. We'll go to the break right after this. Want me to take that for you? Teller's East Indian Needle Mystery.
You know what's really great about this show? It really strikes you as interesting when you see Penn and Teller work, is when you go into many Las Vegas showrooms, the setup is lights and music and atmosphere. But when you see the Penn and Teller show, it's largely a show centered around presentation and naturalistic stuff. You know what I mean? The audience, the lights are on for lots of time. People can hear talk. I mean, it feels like a mentalism show. Like it feels like they're really doing stuff. They're not like creating a visual illusion of a place where stuff happens.
Right.
Right.
They're doing it here now in front of all these people, and you really feel like you're with them in a large crowded room. You know. Got so quiet.
It did get really quiet.
Yeah.
I feel like maybe I goofed something up. Hang on.
No, someone left the
that's the way it
stage.
is.
Someone loud left the stage.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry.
For those of you catching your first Penn and Teller here, Teller doesn't speak on stage. Ugh.
I know. This always makes me nervous.
He looks thrilled.
This looks really real to me.
Never seen this face before in this trick.
I love this.
Oh,
Wait for the face.
Look at the other guy.
I'm good. Oh man, I'm done with this.
See how his hands were open? Everything was open and clear and free and clean.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Man, he ain't scared, is he?
Mm-mm.
No. And
Look at
found their methods have less shenanigans in them than anybody else. Nothing ever seems like it's going sneaky.
Yes. 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 Yeah, man.
Teller do magic, man. Like, I'd been watching him 20 years and I'd never figured out how they did all of a single trick.
I know.
Like, they always fool you, you know, because their misdirection is so good. Their structure is so strong.
That particular effect too, like for people who are looking for a little touch of the dangerous, you know, a little, just to add a touch of that to your show. You know, there's always like, there's basically 5 really good effects that you can go to, like that one. And that one's always been in the top 5 of, like, you know, I've seen people close at the Magic Castle. I've seen people close the stage show with that trick. And I've also seen people do that show in the close-up show as like a middle trick, you know, and not even at the end. So I think one of the things that's so nice about that choice is that it's obviously a stage trick. It's actually something, it's hundreds of years old, but it's obviously a stage trick with tiny little props, you know?
That really play big.
Yeah, how far does this go back? I mean, I know it goes back to at least Houdini. Does it go back farther than that?
Yes.
The East Indian needle trick?
Mm-hmm.
I would say so.
Is it actually that, though? But you know how that stuff goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean,
some guy in the 50s invented it and called it like the, you know, caveman, you know, needle
traditionally trick. Teller doesn't do his crediting that way, but I can't.
I guess that's true.
I can't really say further than that. I do know that when Penn and Teller, look, they've always had these bits. First time I ever saw Penn and Teller, they were doing the upside down straitjacket escape.
Mm-hmm.
Teller is dangling over a bed of spikes on a bare stage. And Teller is dangling upside down. The rope is underneath a chair, and Penn says he's going to read Casey at the Bat and stand up, and then he starts to read the poem, and then he speeds up and faster and faster and faster. And that was the opening of their show. Since the very beginning, Penn has done his juggling act, and he's got these wonderful moments in there where he's talking about these terribly, incredibly, grossly jagged bottle pieces that'll really kill you. You know, the point being that he talks about how juggling flames isn't really that dangerous.
Right.
What's the worst that can happen? Ooh, ah. Right? And then he says, but this guy, you know, I remember he calls it Satan's little howdy do, right there. So they've always been good at taking stuff that's dangerous and playing it really realistic. Best example is, of course, the bullet catch, which Adam and I were in Las Vegas just a week after the shooting that was there a couple of years ago. And I think it was literally 1 week since they'd taken that out of the show, probably for good. But they had been doing that for 15 years before that, the end of every show. So they've always had this way of doing hyper realistic, dangerous stuff. And their gift of using silence, of the contrast between Penn's voice and silence, has always been one of the major features of the show. And when it comes time to doing these dangerous tricks, you know, Teller's silence can really draw that attention in.
Yeah, I mean, if you're and when you're going to do a trick like that, I think there has to be a certain amount of silence to it, because it takes a lot of focus. Like, the audience needs to really focus on what you're doing. I mean, it is.
Did you notice, though, how quiet the audience? I mean, that was a full theater, right? I assume that video was taken on their tour, like they were doing like smaller colleges a few years back. And he's doing all that, didn't speak a word. There's no music playing. It's just dead air, and the audience is silent. You know, and that shows you how powerful that is. That trick is. You know? Shows you how powerful. It's like no words, nothing. Little tiny thing, quiet.
Yeah. Well, so there's obviously, when you're dealing with Teller, you're always dealing with classic plots that he loves classic magic. He often takes a classic plot, turns it on its head, turns it into something we've never seen. This next clip is called the coins and fish trick. And if you've never seen this, it's another great example of Teller's genius here. So check it out. This is one of our favorites as well.
Let's go back a little further than usual. How about you? Would you come up here, please? Right up here, please. I don't need to know your name. He's not going to talk to you. Right up here. Tell him we'll take him from here. Jonathan, join me. Get a good seat over here.
Hey, maybe I could join you and try and work out how this is done.
Good thinking.
That's so good. Oh yeah. That's good. What'd you say?
I said, I think those were nickels, though.
The wonderful Teller and Pen, ladies and gentlemen.
That was awesome. I've never seen that before. I've heard about it, but I've never seen it. And that's just a brilliant take on Miser's Dream, isn't it?
It really is. You know, just the ability to take that old plot, something that Teller probably grew up as a kid doing, The Miser's Dream, and being able to figure out how to turn that into a routine that had to do with goldfish and then with a goldfish bowl and just all those things. Sometimes I wonder how they did it. Like, how did Teller come up with that? What was the thought process behind that?
Mm-hmm.
Really creative and beautiful.
Yeah.
And fools you too. I mean, when you see that, you really do get fooled. It's good magic, man.
It really is good magic. Yeah. It's really awesome.
They fool you every time.
Mm-hmm.
They fool you every time, you know. It's fun to theorize. I'm not going to theorize about that trick on YouTube, of course. I've seen it so many times, but there's no doubt about it. I remember when I first saw that show that had that trick in it, you know, no matter how many times you listed the great tricks in the show, that one just kept popping right up. You're like, well, what about that thing?
Yeah.
You see that thing coming, you know?
One thing I know for sure is that backstage, there's a giant aquarium full of those fish. All I know.
I thought you were going to say filled with those coins.
Could be filled with the coins. There's one with the coins and one with, you're right, Aaron. I blew that.
Probably just the coins because he turns them into fish.
You're probably right.
That part he doesn't have to worry about.
Put a one in chat if that was your first time seeing the goldfish trick. If that was your very first time seeing it, put a 1 in chat there. A few people, yeah.
Not really. A lot of people have seen it, I guess, huh?
It just takes them a while to type in. Yeah, so again, you know, classic example of Teller's brilliance. You know, I don't think it gets any better than that. But alas, it may, because Teller has something else that you really need to see. Again, just his brilliance just shines through. Let's check it out. All right, this is the next one that we picked for you guys. It's called Shadows.
Oh, this is a good one. Yeah.
This is not juggling.
That, huh?
That is so great.
That was always considered for the longest time, you know, one of Penn and Teller's most powerful artistic pieces of magic. And, you know, it's been years since I've seen it, and probably never seen it so close, right? Can you all tell me, or us, what's the effect of that? What's the effect?
I've thought about this so many times, Aaron.
Isn't it like a sympathetic effect? Like it's the sympathetic, right? It's like whatever you do to the shadow happens to the actual flower, as compared to the reverse. Cut the flower, the shadow would change.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's what happens, and then what happens?
Well, then he cuts himself, and the painting bleeds, or the shadow bleeds, which is pretty awesome.
So
that's where it just goes crazy, right? You're just like, I don't know.
No, I mean, it reverses, except so he goes from cutting the shadow and the living thing reacts.
Right.
Cuts the shadow, living thing reacts, cuts the shadow, living thing reacts. That's supposed to be the end. Then he cuts a living thing.
And the shadow reacts.
But it's a escalated living thing. It's not just a living thing, but a sentient thing. You know, it's him, right? So it's really the living thing in the painting, and it's the painting and the flower, the painting and the flower, but he's also got a shadow of him.
Yeah. Like we know Penn and Teller for years, right? We've seen their stuff, but isn't it amazing when you see that? That's really them just like putting the marker down going, yeah, you think we're like fun and games, but then there's this. You know what I mean? It's like, let's just stick the marker in there. We're as good as anybody, you know?
Yeah, but that was there at the beginning. I mean, that was there.
Yeah, that was there at the beginning, yeah.
That was in the show the first time I saw it. That was in the show by 1992, I guess.
Steve was saying he remembers seeing him work it out at the West Side Arts Theater in the 80s. So, yeah, I believe, you know, you hear the story about when Penn and Teller came together, and of course, Teller had a lot of ideas. He had a lot of magic worked out. And you know, they were able to combine and do it. But I think, you know, had it not been for the fact that Teller was already pretty versed in a lot of classic magic, and he was having these ideas that you know, a young man who's inspired by magic and art and music and theater and wants to combine them all, he often has that experience in his 20s when he's first, you know, just starting to embrace all the art forms and how to raise the art form of, how to raise rather magic to an art form. There's always this discussion about whether magic is an art form or not. People are on either sides of that argument. But obviously, the answer to that depends on who the practitioner is. In almost all cases,
I think that's a great point too. But it's like, how can you look at shadows and not say that's not art? Right?
I don't understand. I get confused at this exact statement. I don't understand what makes shadows artistic that makes other magical effects inartistic. Like I don't understand what that means.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. That to me seemed to have a statement behind it, right? More than most things.
Well, I give
or
you
some things.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'll give you a good example. So imagine that you watch a magician and he comes out and he lights a dove pan on fire, covers it up, pulls the top off, and a bird flies out. End of scene. Was that artistic? What was that?
Certainly less so.
It's a trick. That's a trick.
Yeah, it's a trick, right? It's a trick. So there's really no thought was put into really the way it was presented. But you could take that same trick and you could turn it into something that engages a person emotionally.
You're saying that you could take a dove pan, which is really just a box that allows you to put flat fire in it and then appear a creature, right? I mean,
which makes it awesome right from the beginning because there's fire. But go ahead.
And a creature. So
a creature, yes, exactly.
So at the end of the day, you have, a device. Lots of magic's got devices. Penn and Teller use plenty of devices.
Sure.
Now, they tend to make their devices look not like devices. They don't tend not to look like you could buy them in a magic shop. They've always had their own props made for everything, even if they're reasonably standard magic props. They're certainly always done to spec with a high degree of specificity to have the exact look that they wanted to have. But now we're to the question of what makes for art in magic, which is, I know, a long conversation for another day.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say one thing about it, that trick is, and maybe this is part of the reason that people tend to associate with being such an artistic trick, is it is a legitimately original routine.
Yeah.
No one's ever really done that progression of effects before. I had not seen a person cut a shadow and have a real thing be damaged, but I have no idea, but I would imagine that was not first conceived of in that space, but I don't know.
It's interesting to see what our members have to say about this as well. Craig says that shadow works for so many art forms and it has the form of the mysterious. You're totally right, Craig. Totally. William says that it doesn't have the art form of a story behind it. You're right about that too. The addition of the story will raise a magic performance to a level of something that's artistic. And James says shadows is very theatrical and poetic, but all magic is art and artful. But it's not all presented as theater or in the poetic way. Exactly, James.
Yeah. I just want to throw something out there. I think Shadows has a story because sometimes we think a story has to be like this big, long thing, right? Oh, it started here and then we did this and this and that and all this other stuff happens. But I think the story here is just what we said, right? I cut the shadow, the real, right? So it's like that's the story. It may not be like a story like we think about it.
Well, it's a play.
Yeah, it's a moment. It's just a thought. It's just a moment. Like a poem almost, right? A poem isn't a complete story. It's a thought. It's a moment. It's just
or a haiku, which
thing. Yeah, exactly.
A few lines. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, you were talking about, I know Teller's parents were artists, lifelong artists. So I know Teller was thinking about magic as art from the very beginning.
Sure.
And was always going to be a professional artist. He's always had a professional view of it. He never really looked at it the way a lot of us did when he was first starting out. Like it was like a lot of us did magic for quite some time before thinking about whether or not it was an art form or even caring. Right?
Yeah,
Sure.
you're right. Yeah, because it wasn't art that attracted me to magic. It was mystery. It was the puzzle. It was like the power. It wasn't until I started to watch, early on, like I couldn't even, as a young boy, I couldn't even recognize what was art and what was magic and what separated the two. It wasn't until I got older, went to, started to study art, started to study music and poetry and the different art forms until I started to realize what it is that set certain magicians apart and made their actual magic rise to being a beautiful art form. Yeah, man. I mean, Teller is really good at it. I think we have another example here, and I'm glad we're getting to focus on Teller today. Aaron?
Before you skip to it, it's an interesting, Clive Hayward just says this piece speaks to him about the consequences of your actions.
Yeah.
And I think that's right, because it's a really interesting point, because what you have there is a kind of malicious guy who discovers that he has power over the real thing by playing with his imaginative version, he messes with it in his mind and it happens in reality, right? And if you take that the same way, then he has an accident and his reality is damaged and it messes with his mind. So really astute, Clive. Thanks for that.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
Totally nailed it. All right, you guys ready to see this next one? So again, love this so much. If you've never seen this, I think you're going to enjoy it, hopefully as much as I do. All right, check it out. Here we go. Can you see it?
Oh, yeah.
The next trick is done with just a piece of thread.
What do you guys think about that ending to that?
You see it, but you still don't believe it.
It's so that one, especially that one, has always been so strange, because he starts it by saying this one is done with a single piece of thread or piece of string, and then he has that ending to it.
Well, remember when we were out there in Las Vegas and Teller told us that Penn didn't like that trick?
Yeah.
And they had real disagreements about that trick that were not resolved. Teller liked it, Penn didn't like it. I think, don't quote me on it, but I think Penn suggested the setup and the blow off, right? And it was a compromise decision. The idea being that the idea that was ultimately presented is that this was exactly what it was. You know what I mean? I guess you can't say that we're exposing the trick in this context when the trick is totally about an invisible piece of string. And I believe what they said was that, the idea being presented is that really it's kind of astonishing at what can be accomplished within one piece of string.
You know what I really enjoyed about that is the escalation of it, right? So here's the ball, here's the hoop. Then we go to the bench and it just moves a little bit. And then it escalates until it's, you know what I mean? It's not just like, here's the ball, now it's floating. You know what I mean? It's just like this very careful escalation of the way it animates itself. I think it's just a beautiful routine.
Well, absolutely. But there's a real conflict in this trick. And the reason we shared that sort of debate is because it's problematic. You have a beautiful, beautiful trick. I think what Teller was telling us was that, he wasn't really even sure at the end of the day if the trick was so amazing or if it was really the ingenuity was really what was astonishing about it, right? That the fact that it is so economical and that so much build and so much escalation, like Steve was saying, can be accomplished with that trick. And so they really did decide in that case that perhaps the most interesting thing about it was that, and therefore to let that be what it was about. There's no doubt about it, though. Conventionally speaking, they definitely gave the secret up of that trick at the end, and frankly, they gave it up at the beginning too.
Mm-hmm.
In just the same way we were saying they don't expose magic when we're often accused of it. They just use this incredible setup. Well, in this case, it's a little different. They said this is how it works, and they showed you the incredible trick, and then they went, "Yep, that's how it worked."
Yeah, that's why this one was always a little weird. Like this was the one that had, no, you're right, William. I don't think it's totally done by that method either. I think it's a combination of methods, but it's so this one was always a little weird to me because of that comment, and that ending on it. I mean, it just it was always just just a little weird. Like,
sorry.
No, I just always felt like when I saw that, I always felt like, what? Why did he tell me that?
So
right.
Here's a question for y'all. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that there was more going on than just a single piece of string. Right?
Okay.
Does that make it a stronger decision? Is the audience left to believe that it was done by more than a piece of string? Or is the audience left to believe that you showed the method and that it was an amazing little way to make a ball look like it's floating?
Do you know what I kind of think? I kind of think like they come out and they go, we're going to tell you how this works, but we're still going to make you believe it. We're still going to we're going to tell you how it works. We're still going to make you believe that the ball floats. And they do.
Yeah.
And they do. And then they come out in the end to reinforce it by cutting, you know what I mean? Boop. He told you. Like you came along,
Yeah.
So yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's a beautiful.
That's how it works. There's no doubt that that's how it works, and that's your response. It's just definitely it's a unique choice.
Yeah, it is.
You have to be a pretty confident artist at the height of your powers to feel empowered to make that choice.
So here's some of the comments. Steve says, how many people in the audience if they were polled, would not believe it was a thread, that Penn was lying. I think a lot. I think that it's the construction of that makes you say that cannot be done with thread. There was a loop. The ball went through a loop. There could be no string anywhere, So yes, I think you're right. Polling the audience would be interesting, but I think a lot of them would say no, it was done some other way. William says the ball also becomes a pet story, and then Teller proves it was just a thread the whole time. Steve, that almost makes them think that is not the real secret. They are still clueless. I think that's the key to it. I think the audience, and very much many magicians who see that, are still clueless as to the method, as to how it's really done. It looks so magical.
Well, the issue, Adam, is always in these situations, and this is kind of what I was trying to get at. If the audience believes, now in this case, if the entire setup is, look at how we can tell a story with a simple piece of string, we can animate. It's like taking a string and a little worm and making a worm look like it's alive, using a piece of string. That's all well and good. If it doesn't matter, right? If there were 3 shills and 5 methods, right? At the end of the day, if the intended effect is look at the amazing things you can make happen with just one piece of string as a method, well, sure. But if the audience believes, but it still rests on the fact that if the audience believes they know how the trick is done, it doesn't matter if they're wrong. We simply don't get any credit, If the audience is satisfied that you floated using magnets and that puts it to bed for them, the only way to disabuse them of the notion is to say, it wasn't magnets. I used this false bottom.
Exactly.
You can't actually rescue anything that way. So it would make sense if Penn and Teller's whole goal is to put across that idea. Look at how we can create an entire imaginative story, reality, magically, using a string. Now that's a fine magical story. And it may in fact involve a lot more magic than it. But there's no way that part of the effect in that case is not that they fooled the audience, except for getting them to come along, right? The audience isn't left feeling like there was a whole lot of that magical effect that they don't understand. The audience is left feeling like, oh, they do understand it, and it was amazing, which is what we hypothesized that they wanted to say.
Yeah, they do that a lot, Aaron. You're right. I mean, that's one of the key things Penn and Teller, like I've always done, is they've always tried to make the audience feel like that Penn and Teller are giving you a doorway into seeing the behind the scenes of how magic works. That has been an aspect to their act forever. And when I think about it, that routine personifies that idea almost just like clear cups and balls,
Yeah, but as I recall, the clear cups and balls actually beats you up at the end.
Yeah.
Aren't you left, most of the time, you're left feeling like whatever they set you up with was a setup, because by the time it's all over, you don't know how anything happened. This one appears to be a little different because at the end you do know what happened and it was just marvelous.
I'm not sure that I do though. Like I think, as a magician,
but
sure.
That's what I'm telling you. I'm saying even if they use 4 other methods, they have tended to communicate to the audience that it was all in the piece of string. And if they successfully communicated that, I don't think at the end the feeling is, wink, you and I both know it was 18 other things. I think the ending of that one is that we're left to think that no matter how many methods they used, no matter how much we don't understand, we're led to believe we did understand it. And it was just masterful and genius and all but impossible. But that's the kind of thing we can do with a piece of string.
But there's one thing for sure here, and I think this is the point of today's Afternoon Astonishment, and that is, if you're trying to raise your magic to the level of an art form, you have to go deeper. You have to go deeper. And so what we've seen today is Penn and Teller's we focused on Teller, but we've seen that they can take classic magic presentations and really make you think. They can really make you ask questions. They can make you feel emotions. They can make you feel like you're on the inside, then you're not. You don't know if they're lying. You don't know what's the truth. But at the end of the day, you're pretty amazed. No matter what, at the end of the ball trick, you're still amazed. You're amazed because remember, if that used a string, there was still a hula hoop that went over it, that it jumped through. So if they're thinking string,
which is what they would be thinking is like that. Yeah.
Yes. Right. Exactly.
Did you ever have a Don Wayne floating ball?
I did. Yes.
I had one too. And my dream was to present that at the big senior show, and I don't know whatever happened when I was in high school. But when I was in high school, if you were like one of the theater kids, you're allowed to just be in the theater like all the time. Right. And I can remember hours trying to get that thing to work, hours and hours and so much setup, and it just never worked right. So imagine what that must be like. You know what I mean? The setup for that.
Well,
I think that was more of an Aikido floating ball, wasn't it?
Certainly.
Yeah, I kind of got that. Yeah, it's got that. This is obviously different, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, you're right.
No less complicated. You know what I mean?
Well, Steve, your biggest problem back in those days is you didn't have a couple of assistants helping you either. So,
or a bunch of money.
Or a bunch of money, right?
Help to fix the little problems, like lighting.